Imagine working your whole life to build independence, only to have your own parents call you one day and say, "We need $100,000 from you right now, or everything we build as a family will disappear." But here's the twist. They weren't talking about your dream. They were talking about theirs. A vineyard, once thriving, now drowning in debt. Because the so-called golden child, my brother, was handed control like a toy. And now, after years of telling me I wasn't the right fit for family legacy, they suddenly expected me to swoop in as the savior with my bank account. This story didn't begin with dollar signs. It began with favoritism that cut deep. From the time we were children, it was always him. He was the golden boy, the heir, the one who could do no wrong. Every success of his was magnified, and every failure was excused as a learning experience. Meanwhile, when I worked late, got scholarships, built my own career brick by brick, those achievements were met with polite nods or quiet dismissals. My life wasn't celebrated, it was tolerated. Until suddenly, when disaster hit, I became the one they needed most. The vineyard itself was more than just land with vines. It was a symbol. My grandparents had poured decades of sweat and sacrifice into it. To me, it held memories of summer days running between rows, the smell of ripe grapes and the sun, and evenings watching the horizon turn purple as the harvest came in. To my brother, it was a stage, a chance to play businessman with no consequences. He threw parties on the estate, courted investors with promises he couldn't keep, and borrowed money like it was air. And my parents? They watched, enabling him, proud that their legacy was in the right hands. So when I got that phone call, the one where my mother's voice shook, but her words were sharp, I felt the irony like a knife. "You're successful. You can afford it. Your brother is under so much pressure. The vineyard is drowning. If you love this family, you'll step in." That was her pitch. Not a request, not an acknowledgement of past wrongs, just an expectation that my hard-earned money would magically undo years of mismanagement. I remember sitting there, staring at my phone, my heart pounding. Was this really happening? The same people who told me I wasn't needed were now begging for a lifeline? They weren't just asking for help, they were demanding a sacrifice. They wanted $100,000, not a loan, not a stake, but a gift, a silent bailout so the golden child could keep playing king of the vineyard while I played the invisible servant financing his throne. Here's the truth. Money doesn't just reveal priorities, it exposes respect. And in that moment, I realized they didn't respect me at all. They respected my wallet. I had spent years grinding through long hours, budgeting every cent and building security. I worked nights others slept, skipped vacations, and built a reputation in my industry that finally paid off. And they wanted to take all of that and pour it into a bottomless pit because they couldn't face the truth that their chosen son had failed. The weight of that realization hit harder than the request itself. This wasn't just about the vineyard. It was about decades of favoritism, of watching my brother get bailed out for mistakes I would have been crucified for. And here they were, ready to repeat the cycle again, even if it destroyed me financially. I asked myself the question that burned. Was family loyalty worth self-destruction? Or was this the moment I drew the line? As the conversation unfolded, the words that came out of me surprised even me. I asked them why they never came to me before the debts spiraled, why they trusted someone with zero responsibility over someone who had proven discipline again and again. My father tried to cut me off with his usual authority, his voice booming that family businesses belong to family, not outsiders. And I laughed, because wasn't I family too? Or did family only count when they needed my money? That laughter broke something. My parents grew defensive, spinning excuses, but I couldn't unsee the truth. This wasn't about saving the vineyard. It was about saving their pride, about refusing to admit that they had put their faith in the wrong child. So what happened next changed everything. I told them no. Not gently, not with apologies, with a calm firmness that left no room for negotiation. And the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. For the first time, they realized I wasn't the quiet, compliant sibling anymore. I was someone who would build something on my own, and I wasn't about to throw it away for a failing empire I was never allowed to touch. But the story didn't end there, because behind the scenes, I had been watching. I had connections they didn't know about, conversations they didn't think I'd hear, and I had already taken a step that would shake their world more than my refusal ever could. Because while my brother was busy bleeding the vineyard dry, I had been quietly buying shares, buying debts, buying influence. They didn't know it, but piece by piece, I was already building control. And when the day came, when the vineyard was officially on the brink of collapse, the papers revealed a truth they never expected. The heir they had rejected, the child they had overlooked, had become the one who owned the land they thought belonged to their golden boy. And as they stared at me in shock, the question wasn't whether I'd save the vineyard. The question was whether I'd even let them step foot on it again. But before I tell you how that moment played out and what decision I made that stunned not just my family, but the entire town, we need to rewind. Because this wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. And justice doesn't come all at once. It builds, moment by moment, until the weight of years tips the scale. So let me take you back into the heart of this story, where loyalty, betrayal, and legacy collided in ways no one saw coming.
When you've been dismissed your whole life, there comes a moment when silence is no longer an option. For me, that moment wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. I had lived in the shadow of favoritism for decades, and now I stood holding the one thing my family never expected me to have: power. In the weeks after refusing their desperate request, the tension grew. I got messages from relatives calling me cold. My brother left voicemails dripping with arrogance, accusing me of being jealous. And my parents? They switched from begging to threatening. "If you let this vineyard collapse, you'll ruin our family name," my father warned. But I knew the truth. The vineyard had been collapsing long before me. What they didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this. While they were busy pouring everything into my brother's hands, I had been building something far more solid: foresight. Over the years, I noticed the debts piling up, the unpaid bills, the investors pulling out. And while they laughed at my corporate job, I quietly learned about acquisitions, contracts, and leverage. Knowledge is power, and I had been stacking it like bricks. Behind the scenes, I made moves. The bank that held most of their debt? I bought a portion of it. Small investors my brother had burned? I offered them payouts in exchange for their stakes. It wasn't fast and it wasn't easy, but piece by piece, I secured enough influence to become the one person who could decide the vineyard's fate. They thought they still owned it, but on paper, the ground beneath their feet was already slipping away. And then came the meeting. They invited me to the estate, pretending it was a family discussion, but it felt more like an ambush. The dining room, once filled with the smell of wine and oak, carried only tension that night. My parents sat at the head of the table, my brother, on their right, still smug despite the disaster he had created. They laid out the numbers: millions in debt, creditors circling, employees leaving. And then, with all the gravity of a king addressing his court, my father turned to me. "You're the only one who can fix this. Step up, or you'll be the one who kills the family legacy." The silence afterwards was suffocating. All eyes were on me, waiting for me to fold, waiting for me to play the role I had always been assigned: the responsible one, the fixer, the invisible safety net. But not this time. I leaned back, let them finish their performance, and then dropped the truth. "You don't own the vineyard anymore. I do." For a moment, no one breathed. My brother's smirk fell away. My mother blinked. Confusion painted across her face. And my father? His jaw clenched so tight I could almost hear the crack. I explained it calmly, methodically. The debts I'd acquired, the shares I'd bought, the contracts I now held. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. The vineyard wasn't theirs to demand from me anymore. It was mine. The eruption came like thunder. My brother slammed his fist on the table, shouting about betrayal. My father accused me of scheming, of stabbing my family in the back. My mother cried, her words a mix of disbelief and guilt. And through it all, I sat steady. Because for once, the power dynamic had shifted. For once, I wasn't the child begging for recognition. I was the one holding the keys. But here's the twist most people don't expect. I didn't do it just for revenge. Did it feel satisfying to watch their faces collapse under the weight of their own favoritism? Absolutely. But deep down, this wasn't about destroying them. It was about protecting what truly mattered. You see, the vineyard wasn't just theirs. Dozens of workers depended on it. Families who had been loyal for years, people who had given their sweat to keep the vines alive. To abandon them would have been cruel. So while my parents were fixated on image and my brother was obsessed with pride, I made a decision. I would save the vineyard, not for them, but for the people who deserved stability. I restructured the business, sold off the flashy equipment my brother had wasted money on, paid off debts strategically, one by one. I brought in managers who knew what they were doing, people who cared about sustainability over vanity. It wasn't easy and it wasn't glamorous, but slowly, the vineyard began to breathe again. And my family, they watched from the sidelines, furious and helpless. They came to me with offers, demands, even pleas, but I held my ground. You wanted him to run it. You made your choice. This is mine now. The town began to talk. At first, it was whispers, shock at the golden child's fall, curiosity at my sudden rise. But as the vineyard stabilized, the whispers turned to respect. People saw the difference, saw the discipline, saw the results. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just the overlooked sibling. I was the one who turned failure into survival. Years of being underestimated had hardened me, and now that strength became my greatest weapon. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the only way to reclaim your worth is to stop asking for recognition and start building it yourself. My family tried to guilt me, saying I had divided us forever. But had I? Or had they done that years ago when they chose favoritism over fairness, pride over love? I wasn't the one who broke the family. I was the one who refused to let their mistakes drag me down anymore. The last time I saw my brother on the estate, he walked through the rows of vines like a ghost, his arrogance gone. He muttered something about how it was supposed to be his, how everything had been promised to him. And I looked at him and said words that had been sitting on my tongue for years. Promises mean nothing without responsibility. It wasn't just about the vineyard. It was about life. We can't choose the family we're born into, but we can choose the legacy we build. And mine wasn't going to be defined by their favoritism. Now, the vineyard thrives again. Workers are paid fairly, debts are gone, and every season feels like proof that I made the right choice. My parents, they still can't look me in the eye with bitterness, and that's fine, because I don't need their validation anymore. In the end, I didn't just take back land or business. I took back control of my story, and that's something no one, not even family, can take away. So when people ask me if I regret it, my answer is simple: no. Because sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself is refusing to let someone else write your ending. And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. Family can wound you in ways strangers never could. But it's also family that teaches you the sharpest truth. Respect isn't given by blood. It's earned by action. I stopped waiting for their respect. I built it for myself. And when I look at the vineyard now thriving under my care, I realize something. This was never just about grapes or land. It was about proving, finally, that I was never the invisible one. I was the one who saw clearly when everyone else was blind. So if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed, remember this: you don't need permission to rise. Sometimes the best way to answer doubt is to succeed loud enough that no one can ignore you. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge isn't destruction, it's growth. And trust me, I've tasted it.